speaking of developments, Finance Minister also saying that social spending has now officially breached the 1 trillion rand mark, and that's for the 2020-2021 financial year. Over 27 million South Africans were on some form of social grant, we are told, accounting for almost half of the population. In the midterm budget policy statement delivered yesterday, Gonongwana also saying that government will announce changes to the social grants in the February budget. Executive Director of the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, Isobel Frye, is now leading a campaign by the Budget Justice Coalition to ensure permanent social assistance, at least for adults between the ages of 18 and 59. She joins us now via our video link for reaction to what the Minister says. And Isobel, it's always great getting your take on these issues. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Let me just get a sense at the start whether you feel there was enough detail around social spending from the Minister in his speech yesterday.
Thanks. Good morning, Ayanda. Look, the MTB, the medium-term budget policy statement is that. It's a statement as to what direction the coming budget is going to take. I think having been pushed to quite a fair degree by civil society organizations such as the coalition I'm part of, the finance minister felt compelled to utter, to share a position, which is basically nothing's going to be finalized until next year. Now, on the one hand, for policy advocates, that's a very useful statement because it means that we can engage in coming months. I think, however, for the 9 million people who are receiving the 350 Rand grant, that's not very great comfort. It doesn't mean that they have any hope in the future beyond March because they haven't been taken into the national confidence. And I think the previous parts of your news bulletin that I was seized by was really the issue of the trauma of the past and how we need political will to take us forward. And I think the same can be said on a very different level on the aspect of socioeconomic rights and the trauma that poverty is bringing to people right now. We need to have a political will that comes forward and says the fact that more than half our population daily lives in poverty, in grinding poverty, is not acceptable. How do we go about trying to find the resources to solve that? I mean, from the figures that National Treasury has, we can see that for 100 billion Rand per annum, we can move everybody above the food poverty line. There is a very clear statement of intent and action that can happen, and I think that it's about time that we stop the dilly-dallying, that we actually have our government take the lead, form a commission and say, we need to see where the money comes from because we're committed to having it taken forward. We cannot have a situation where people cannot be guaranteed where tomorrow's food comes from.
Absolutely. You've answered this question, I guess, subtly in your response, but perhaps it's worth asking it boldly. Given the pressure that organizations like yours have put on the minister and his utterances yesterday, for you, is it a far-gone conclusion that the grant is here to stay, despite how cautious he was in his wording yesterday?
You see, now you're asking me to predict the world, to put a difficult question. I think a couple of things just in how I answer. Firstly, when the social relief of distress grant was announced by the president, we know that people in Treasury were deeply unhappy because they said once something of this magnitude is rolled out, the state finds it very difficult to roll it back. Now, I think if we take a step back and we ask, why is that? It is that because there are so many people living in poverty. So yes, it is not going to be easy for the state to roll it back, and it should not be easy because the state raises taxes in order to spend. I just want to touch base on that. The fact that Gonongwana said that this is a pro-poor budget is not a pro-poor budget. The fact that 60% of budget is spent on people, that's what governments do. They spend money on people. The fact that 50% of our people are poor doesn't mean that because you're spending money on poor people, it's a pro-poor budget. That's a state budget. What we need to be doing is to really look at pro-poor spending. We need to be looking at those catalysts that enable people with a safety net to actually move forward into a situation where they can be generating income, making small businesses thriving in places where there is economic depression. We're not doing that. We are begrudgingly giving small bits of crumbs to people and saying, go on bended knee in order to get that. That's not what our developmental state's about. We need to have leadership that comes and says, another world is possible, and the power to make that other world is in our hands, and we need to be the ones taking forward. So a basic income grant shouldn't be a debate. We should now be moving to the discussion as how it gets rolled out and when.
Right.
There is no other policy that has come forward that has the power to transform in the way that a basic income grant can. Our country has the highest level of inequality in the world. We have the resources. The question is how we distribute. Will there be some people unhappy about how the money is redistributed? They will be. But there are millions of people who currently live in a life of destitution, whose unhappiness cannot equate with those few whose disruptions are starting to feel threatened by.
Absolutely. Let's, I guess, take a snapshot of what that debate looks like at the moment. It was the World Bank, I think, back in September, who said that if South Africa is going to introduce some kind of basic income grant, it should be more of a job seekers grant targeted specifically at those who are unemployed. I imagine that's the kind of targeting you're also thinking of.
No. We have gone through that research very thoroughly and other research like that. When we're dealing with prescripts like that, we're dealing with people who are not situated in the current situation in South Africa. In South Africa, we have 22 million adults who are not employed. And that's not because they don't want to be employed. It's because there are no jobs. Now, if you say to someone, I will give you enough money to eat if you can prove to me that you're looking for a job, that person could turn around and say, for the last year, I've been looking for a job. I haven't found one. 70% of our unemployed are long-term unemployed. That means that they have been out of employment for more than a year. We have a rising number of discouraged work seekers who say, it's not worth my while to keep on spending money looking for a job that's not there. What we're saying is invert that. Use the money and give a universal grant so that in situations where there is no disposable income, there will be. So that we can start generating our own jobs. For kids in township areas to start having Wi-Fi, internet cafes, you need to have people who have the ability to pay for that. Right now, we've got a huge willingness to buy, but we have no demand because people don't have money. I mean, the levels of poverty and destitution are stark, but they're hidden from the main areas where conversations are being held. What we're saying is have a shock stimulus, flood, if you wish, poor areas with money so that people can start their own livelihoods. They can start bakeries. I was talking to someone the other day who was speaking to someone in Soweto who wants to run a bakery, but there isn't enough demand for him to justify getting a loan to get the kinds of equipment necessary. If we were able to invert the pyramid, we're basically punishing poor people for living in poor areas. We can't do that. We need to be saying, in this situation, let's shock it. And I mean, I think that the worrying thing for me is we keep on having this conversation. We don't have pro-poor policy. We don't have policymakers who are saying, how do we catalyze a change? All we're saying is, how many small crumbs can we afford to give to people? Now, in our democracy and the freedoms that we fought for, this is not the future that we should be looking to.
Isobel Frye, thanks very much for always helping us move the conversation forward. I appreciate you helping us sharpen the nuance around this discussion. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Isobel is the Director for the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. Once again, appreciate your insights indeed.